All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating and honestly, highly misunderstood neurobiological puzzle: social burnout. We're going to look at what literally happens inside your brain when the social world transforms into a constant source of sheer exhaustion, and how your brain actually takes some pretty drastic measures to protect you. So here's our central mystery box for today. Why on earth does a socially burned out brain actually find extreme, violent content relaxing? Meanwhile, a totally casual social Twitch stream feels absolutely terrifying. It sounds completely contradictory, doesn't it? Like, why would pure, unadulterated horror be calming while an everyday, normal conversation triggers a massive panic response? Now, take a listen to this incredibly intense quote from our sources. "I see people as flesh bags, expandable." I know, your first reaction to hearing that might be total shock. But as we dig into the research, it becomes super clear that this isn't psychopathy. It's actually a form of emotional armor. And we're going to use neuroscience today to understand exactly why the brain builds this massive defensive wall. To make sense of this, we really need to explore the paradox of violence and why something so seemingly cold actually feels much safer to an exhausted mind. It's a brilliant, though kind of grim, reality of how our brain operates under severe stress. Think about it. Impersonal violence or heavy, dark imagery is simple. It's predictable. It's distant. It literally requires zero empathy or complex social decoding. But then you look at social content, like a lively chat or a Twitch stream. That demands constant interpretation. You have to navigate hidden hierarchies and extreme unpredictability. For a brain that is already running on empty, that level of social complexity is just way too heavy a lift. So, what exactly is social overload? To figure out why the brain actively avoids people, we have to look at the severe toll of chronic stress and define what this overload is at a purely mechanistic level. The exact path usually kicks off with chronic social deprivation. We're talking years of lacking personal privacy, maybe constant exposure to toxic environments, or just an absolute lack of genuinely safe connections. This prolonged state leads straight into hypervigilance. You're just constantly on guard. Over time, that hypervigilance flips into deep resentment over the injustice of it all, which ultimately boils over into symbolic aggression. Essentially, the brain learns to treat everyday social life as a fundamental unfairness. It creates this constant simmering state of what experts call rage grief. Now, you have to remember that everyday social interaction, it is not a light task. It is literally high-performance sports for your nervous system. Social overload pushes your brain's threat detection systems way past their bandwidth capacity, and it does this through three specific types of load. First, the cognitive load, having to constantly microprocess people's intentions and status. Then, the emotional load of navigating vulnerability and social hierarchy. And finally, the sensory load, just processing the chaotic noise, rapid speech, and total unpredictability of a crowd. Let's pop the hood and look at the actual neurological machinery here, specifically focusing on two key players: the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. First up is the amygdala. You can think of this little guy as your brain's internal alarm bell, its dedicated threat detector. Years of social boundary violations and chronic stress basically act like someone grabbing the gain knob on an amplifier and just cranking it all the way up. The amygdala becomes massively hyperreactive. It fires too fast, way too often, and takes entirely too long to shut off. Suddenly, it's reacting to random social noise, like people laughing in the distance, or just a casual offhand comment, with the exact same intensity as if you were facing real physical danger. Your alarm bell for human contact gets permanently jammed in the on position. And then, right behind your forehead, we have the prefrontal cortex, or the PFC. This is your logical control center. It's the part of the brain that handles social interpretation and inhibition. Normally, it's the responsible adult that tells your panicked amygdala, "Hey, calm down, that person is just making a joke, we're totally safe." But under chronic social overload, the PFC gets severely, utterly exhausted. It literally loses the ability to put the brakes on the amygdala. Because that braking system is offline, your tolerance for absolutely anything socially ambiguous just falls off a cliff. And that is exactly why your exhausted brain starts begging for predictable, simple, and cold stimuli. So how does the brain adapt to this? We see a major physical shift in how the brain handles internal rewards, specifically involving dopamine and a region called the insula. This right here is fundamental. Under normal circumstances, your brain enthusiastically rewards social contact with a nice hit of dopamine. It feels good to connect. But when your social experiences have basically consisted of years of pure exhaustion or negativity, the brain literally stops rewarding connection. It steps in and decouples dopamine from social cues entirely. Instead, it shifts that dopamine release towards solitary, analytical, or even really dark material. And why does it do that? Simple. Because that material provides safe stimulation, but with zero social cost. Let's talk about the insula. This is a part of your brain that constantly tracks your internal discomfort. Well, under severe social overload, the system completely miscalibrates. The old default mode used to be, hey, people are generally neutral unless proven dangerous. But the new, overloaded mode, it flips to, people are dangerous unless proven absolutely safe. This is the very foundation of social burnout. Social contact is no longer seen as an opportunity for connection. Your brain now treats literally any human presence as a micro-stress response. This brings us to probably the most misunderstood part of this entire phenomenon: why empathy seems to just vanish. And spoiler alert, it's about protection, not coldness. The brain absolutely does not shut down empathy because you're suddenly a cold or malicious person. From a strictly neurobiological perspective, empathy is enormously, incredibly expensive. It costs extreme amounts of cognitive fuel to run. When your entire system is overloaded and exhausted, the brain simply shifts into a detached, observational mode to conserve its extremely limited processing power for basic survival. Empathy requires safety and bandwidth, and right now, your brain has neither. And this is such a crucial takeaway. If you hear violent or extreme language from someone dealing with severe social burnout, you have to realize it's rarely a literal homicidal plan to cause harm. Like our sources point out, violent language is often just the brain's primitive shorthand for please remove the source of this pain. It's an emergency flare screaming, I want this exhaustion to stop right now and I want control over my environment back. At its core, it's a desperate wish for relief, not actual aggression. So when we bring all of this neuroscience together, it paints a very different picture. We're looking at an adaptation, not a defect. It's about surviving in a highly toxic or overwhelming environment. Because here is the bottom line. Underneath that hyper-reactive amygdala, underneath the sudden preference for dark, cold content, and underneath all that heavy emotional armor, lies a perfectly normal set of human needs. What does the brain actually want? It just wants relief from the pain and exhaustion. It wants to rebuild a sense of personal autonomy. It wants drastically reduced exposure to draining, intrusive people. And honestly, it usually just hopes for even one single, safe, compatible human connection that won't overload the system. I want to wrap up this explainer by leaving you with a bit of a provocative question to chew on. When we really look at the mechanics, the utter fatigue of the prefrontal cortex, the constant blaring alarm state of the amygdala, what happens to our understanding of people who retreat into these distant extremes? Maybe we need to stop viewing social burnout as some kind of personality defect or moral failure. What if we recognize it for exactly what neuroscience tells us it is? What if this entire process is actually a brilliant, entirely predictable physiological survival adaptation by a brain living in a world that has simply become way too loud? Thanks so much for joining me today, and I really hope this gave you a totally new perspective.